Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, which is From Abstract to Impact, Crafting Effective Posters and Oral Presentations. As Dawn mentioned, I'm the editor-in-chief for Prehospital Disaster Medicine and a professor of emergency medicine at the University of Alberta. I also have a master's degree in statistics from the Rochester Institute of Technology and a master's degree in disaster medicine from the UPO. I'm visiting professor in disaster medicine for the European Master in Disaster Medicine and adjunct faculty for the Harvard BIDMC Disaster Medicine Fellowship. I have grants and research support from the Canadian Medical Association and the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, and I'm the CEO and founder of Stat59. So today's webinar, because it's a webinar, is largely didactic, but we will have lots of time for questions and comments. So please feel free to put your questions or comments in the Q&A portion of the webinar, the Zoom platform, and then I'll be happy to read through them as we're going along. And then, of course, we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So today we're going to talk about 12 tactical tips for an academic presentation that shines. And what are my 12 tips? Well, first one is read the instructions for authors. Second is to focus on your objective. Think about the value proposition. Create a snappy title that includes the study design. Favor clarity over cleverness. Plot the data. Finish with a strong conclusion. Include the ask. We're going to talk about this. This is something I stole from the startup world. Check your text, revise, get help, get in the reps, read the room, and have a game day ritual. So we're going to go through each of these 12 tips in details. And like I said, please feel free with your comments or questions in the Q&A. All right. So we're going to talk about tactics today, building that idea into a presentation. This is kind of assuming that you already have a written abstract. Okay, so your written abstract was the strategy. You should have a written abstract already that has a title and usually has the objectives, the methods, the results, and the conclusions already there. If you don't have that and you're still working on that, then I would definitely urge you, if you're looking for some help, to take a look at the webinar we did in July of this year, which was the essentials of a compelling conference abstract from draft to perfection. And that is available on the WADM website, the WADM YouTube channel, and also on the WADM website. All right, so number one tactic is what we say in computer. I'm also a computer programmer. We call this RTFM, or read the manual. Read the instructions for authors. Okay, so this is the first thing you want to make sure you're doing when you get invited to do your abstract. So either go to the website or look at your email and look closely at those guidelines. So when I'm looking through these, the first thing I'm looking at is, how long is the presentation? How long do I have to talk? And does that include the questions afterwards, or is there time dedicated for questions? And are the questions going to come right after, or they come in a panel afterwards? So that's really important for me, so that I'm thinking about how I'm going to structure my presentation. What's the slide format? It's pretty easy. Almost all of them now are 16:9 PowerPoint, but take a look at that. If you're thinking about adding video or audio into your presentation, make sure you check the guidelines for that. I look to see if there's a slide template, particularly for the title page and for the conflict of interest page. And then look carefully about how you're going to submit. So make sure that you are ready in time to get that through the submission platform. Most of the platforms now require you to submit in advance, although most of them also have a last-minute option at the venue. So look through those oral presentation guidelines to make sure nothing surprises you. If you're looking for a poster, if you're doing a poster, same thing. Look closely at those guidelines. What size is your poster? When do you need to have it ready? Where is it going to be displayed? Print or electronic? We're seeing now sort of, I think, probably about 50-50 with conferences about whether they're print or electronic. Watch for portrait or landscape format. It's super embarrassing to show up with a landscape type poster and then find out the space you've given is for a portrait-based poster. Look for upload instructions. If they give font size guidelines, I tend to follow them. It's sort of the decorum of how the other posters are going to look. So I'll follow those font sizes. And then if you're looking, is there a slide template? So these are all the things I want to know before I even get started. What you don't want to do is start down this process and then find out later you need to backtrack because of something you missed. So that's it. Read the manual. Number 2, focus on an objective. The big question you want to ask yourself about these presentations is, what are you trying to prove? Okay, so you're going to have people's attention. If you have an oral presentation, you're going to have people's presentation for maybe 8 minutes. If you have a poster, you might have people's attention for 1 minute. Okay, if you have 1 minute of someone's attention, what are you trying to prove? Okay, so remember, the goal of these academic presentations is to convey a clear message and support it with some compelling combination of images and text. And everything in the presentation should relate to this message, to this objective. And if it's not, it should be deleted. Okay, so edit out anything that is not directly related to those objectives. So here's an example of a poster from Francesca Virginella, who was a master's student who worked with me from USEM presentation in 2019. And here you can see she really focused on a single objective. So the objective of the study is right there in the title: assessment of the validity and reliability of a new triage tool for avalanche mass casualty incidents. The background is extremely short. Okay, we don't need that much background. The objective: create a reliable, valid, accurate triage tool. The methods we use to develop the tool, a picture of the tool, a picture of the results, and then the conclusions. And the conclusions are focused entirely on that objective. Conclusion was adequate validity and reliability in expert hands, poor accuracy when used in non-expert providers, and the study was limited by simulation. So you can see everything on that poster is related to the objective of the study. Number 3, think about the value proposition. And if any of you attended the webinar over the summer about writing the abstract, I talk a lot about this value proposition, which is a term I stole from the startup world. And value proposition in the startup world is how your product relates to your customer. Okay, so I use Uber for Cats. If Uber for Cats is your startup, your value proposition is, what do I provide? Transportation for cats. And my customer, what are their jobs? Their jobs are moving their cats around, and the gain is that cats are happy, and the pain reliever is that they don't have to drive them. Okay. The focus on this is to make sure that just because I have a product doesn't necessarily mean that anybody wants it. Okay. And I use the same thing for my objectives and the audience. So I can talk about my research, but the question is, to my audience, is this part of their job? What are the gains from my research, or what pains does it relieve? Okay. Why? This is the who cares question, or what Joost Behrens, one of my mentors, calls the so what question. So you've proven something with your research. Who cares, or so what? Because this is the big kicker about research. People actually don't care about your research. They care about their problems. Okay? They don't care about your research. They care about their problems. So can you phrase your research in a way that it solves one of their problems? And that's what I like to focus on in my poster or in my oral presentation, is how am I going to solve your problems? Okay. So focus on what your research brings for others, and be really explicit on how your findings can improve something. Mostly this is going to be about patient care. How can this improve patient care? But if you're doing something more systemic, how does this improve administrative care? So just an example, this is sort of the value proposition slide for an oral presentation I gave in Copenhagen last year at USEM. about a product I built. Data Crypt Chain is an open source standard combining blockchain technology with advanced encryption, ensuring healthcare research data remains private, secure, shareable, tamper-proof. Okay, so this abstract presentation was about the research and development of this tool, but people don't really care about the research and the development of the tool. They want to know what the tool can do for them. Okay, so think about your research. What did you discover, and how does that discovery provide a benefit for the people who are watching? Number 4, create a snappy title. Okay, so there's actually some really good guidance on many websites on how to make a title. This one comes from the Journal of Medical Internet Research, and I think they have a beautiful, very structured sort of matrix on how to develop a title. Titles 280 characters is about the maximum. Describe the subject. I don't think that the results should be given in there, so don't reveal the results. Make sure it's concise. It should be understandable outside your field as well. Okay, so I do lots of research on AI in disaster medicine, for instance. Well, a title that says something about zero-shot decoding, right? The advantage of zero-shot decoding in disaster medicine. Most people don't understand what that means, right? And so if that's on a poster, everybody's going to walk by it. So your title should be understandable to people even outside your subfield. And I like to include the study design in the title if it's strong. Okay? So some examples, not so awesome title, a survey of hospital staff following a mass shooting incident. A survey like, what were you looking for? So a better title would be coping strategies used by hospital staff following a mass shooting incident. Okay, and here, survey being a weak methodology, I would just leave the methodology out. Okay, another not so awesome title, Zenith 421 mask is more comfortable than other N95 masks. Doesn't tell you how you came to that conclusion. So I would prefer comparison of provider comfort between commercial N95 masks, a scoping review being a stronger methodology. Which cultural patterns are most helpful to earthquake victims? All right, that's super general, like which earthquake victims and how did you find it out? A better title would be Cultural Coping Patterns Among Survivors of the 2016 Amatrice Earthquake, an ethnographic study. So these studies, you want it to grab people's attention. Poster titles, basically this is most people are going to read your title first, and if they don't like it, are going to walk by. So with a poster, you have one shot to grab the audience's attention. And if it's not in the title, they're going to walk by. So posters should be able to grab your attention from 5 meters away. Okay, so color and font for the title are super important. Mostly we put the title right at the top in 70 to 100 point font. Make sure there's adequate color contrast so people can read it from 5 meters. So this is an example of a poster from one of my colleagues, Samina Ali, and Summer Hudson is a resident in pediatrics, and they work together on this study. And you can see that this poster has this beautiful title right at the top, Virtual Reality Distraction for Intravenous Cannulation-Related Distress in Children, a randomized controlled trial. All right, so already we can look at that. It's like, okay, this is a pediatric study. It's about intravenous, has virtual reality, and it's a randomized controlled trial. So this is something, to me, that's something that definitely grabs my attention. It's got some really trendy keywords in there, right? Like virtual reality, that's awesome. It's in there, grabs people's attention. You can see it's in a huge font, and it's got that contrast of white versus dark blue. And so this is a poster that's going to grab your attention as you walk by so you can stop. So making sure you get that title right is really paramount. With your oral presentations, people are stuck with your title, like they have to listen to you for 8 minutes anyways. But with the posters, this is the most important part of grabbing people's attention. Number 5, clarity over cleverness. Okay. So the big question that always comes up on posters and on oral presentations is how much text should be on that slide? How much text should be on that poster? First thing to remember is your priority is to be clear, concise, and professional. Okay, so that is the priorities of developing that text. So make sure whatever you're putting on there is that. I suggest following the standard abstract guidelines. So whatever headings you did in your written abstract, I follow those out into the poster or the oral presentation. So that's going to be your introduction, methods, results, conclusions in most cases. We like to try to emphasize diagrams or figures over text whenever possible. I personally avoid any references in the poster or in the oral presentation unless it's absolutely critical. Okay, people aren't really probably interested in all the background you read. That's not why they're there. They're there for your value proposition. They're not there to hear how much you read. Always include conflict disclosures on your slides and probably on your poster as well. That depends a little bit on the venue. Some venues will tell you in advance mandatory conflict disclosure and will often have a slide. So watch for that slide template. And you should acknowledge any funding in both the poster and the oral abstract for a couple of reasons. One is the obvious conflict disclosure. We got paid to do this research. The other is that, funding agencies like to see that they're acknowledged. That's why they continue to fund research. So if you get money from the World Health Organization to help with your study, that should be in there. They should be acknowledged as contributing. Writing text for oral presentations, here's my tip. I keep enough text on the slides so that I can keep myself on track without needing notes, okay? I highly discourage writing detailed notes in the speaker notes on your slide software. On PowerPoint, you can put the little speaker notes at the bottom. And I highly discourage you from writing papers or cue cards, especially because what you're going to do is you're going to read them, right? So you can write them and say, well, I'm not going to read it when I'm there. But my experience has been that if it's there, I'm going to read it. So I put enough text on the slides to keep me on track. And that's where I know if it's going to keep me on track, that's enough text. If I need something to keep myself on track, then I add more text. That's my recommendation. Posters, text is really tricky. Getting that sweet part can be really tricky. And I have definitely made the error myself of going either too far one way where there's not enough, or too far where there's too much and nobody can read it. So a good idea is sort of word count of 300 to 800 words. They should be legible at 1 meter, okay? So use headings and subheadings extensively because people are not going to read it linearly, right? They're not going to read it like it's Wuthering Heights and start at the beginning and read till the end. So you need those headings so that people can jump around. Your poster, the institution may give you guidelines for the size of text, but generally 40-point text for headings and 24-point for body text is good. A really important thing is this concept of reader gravity, which means that readers tend to drop down or fall in the direction that you usually read in that language. Okay, so for English, we tend to read from right to left, then we go down. Then we go read from right to left, then we go down. So make sure that your poster follows that reader gravity. And then organization into columns can really help. So this is a prize-winning poster from one of my colleagues, Mia Wisniewski, about older persons with the sit and stand activity. And you can see this poster has a lot of really good characteristics, has a nice big title at the top, but you see the text organization is really nice. Background, purpose, methods, and findings. And you see reader gravity leads us to read first background, then purpose, then methods, then move down to findings. Then there's the results are put in this image, and then the conclusions down at the corner. That's the last thing we're going to read. And the text in here is very large. It's easy to see through it. The headings are well placed. has good contrast and color. And if I want to just find out, if I look at this and I say, well, what kind of study is this? I can look quickly. Oh, methods. This is an ethnography. Okay. And I want to know what were the conclusions. All right, design and implementation strategies tailored to that particular population's needs. So this is a good example of excellent use of text in poster. Number 6, plot the data. So my background is in engineering statistics, and one of our heroes in engineering statistics is Ellis Ott, whose last name is spelled O-T-T. So we'll use this. And he was a big fan of early industrial control processes and always plotting out that data. So the OTT is sort of a reference to his name. Plot the data. So the graphical presentation of your data is going to be so important, whether it's a poster or your oral abstract. Keep in mind, to keep things simple, every graphic should have a purpose, okay? So we talked about that objective at the beginning and the what are you trying to prove? If that graphic doesn't help in the what am I trying to prove, then it should go. Take it out. I prefer to keep the graphs very clean, like line graphs, bar graphs, maybe pie charts if they're used carefully. I think you should need a license to use a pie charts because a lot of people use them incorrectly. But any of those type of standard charts, I avoid really complicated plots, 3D diagrams. A lot of people are not intuitively able to look at a 3D plot and understand what that means. You know, contour plots. I personally love contour plots, but a lot of people look at them and they're just going to look away because they're too complicated. So keep those nice and simple. Keep the color in check and avoid too many contrasting colors. I also recommend that if you, for instance, have a time series and you have a line across there, not only in color should the lines differ, but also in texture, you know, one being solid, dotted, dashed. As far as audio and video, I always avoid embedding audio or video into my oral presentations. I know a lot of people like to put a little movie snippet in there and it can be quite inspirational. My overall experience with these is they work about 50% of the time when I've seen them. There always seems to be, I shouldn't say always, but about 50% of the time there's some problem. The audio isn't right. You can't reach the website. Something goes wrong. So I prefer not to use them because they're just something else for me to stress about during my presentation. If you are going to use them, make sure that when you're at the site, you go into the speaker's room and view it on their hardware and their software platform, because it can be very surprising. And if you had a video and it was a really key part of your oral presentation and all of a sudden you can't see it, that's super frustrating. So I personally avoid them. If you are going to use them, make sure you've practiced that. So here's an example of a slide that I used to describe how our software worked. So this is an oral presentation. And again, I use the principle of how much do I need on the slide so that I can remember what I'm describing. Okay, so here's just a general diagram and I explain how the software is installed and how the keys are made. So instead of a bunch of text that explains what how the software works and me basically reading the text, I provide this graphical explanation and then I talk through. This is an example of a very nice poster from the Trek team, from Terry Clausen and his team, which is talking about information needs and preferences of children in general EDs in Canada. And you can see here, this is a very modern looking poster and has lots of data points. You see there's very little text on the poster actually. It's a bunch of plots, but very simple plots. You can see here's a little bar plot about which provinces participated. There's a pie chart about did you come to the emergency department with a known medical condition or no, and then a lot of infographics. So these are something that people tend to connect with. They tend to be a lot easier to jump around from piece to piece. And you can see they're mostly simple and the color is quite simple. You can see there's really only like 3 different colors on there. There's this sort of purple color and a few shades of that, and this orange-red color and a few shades of that. Okay. Finish with a strong conclusion. This is something that, as a journal editor, I think is one of the pieces of written manuscripts that people really struggle with. And finishing with a strong conclusion. Conclusions at the end, we want to hear about your study, okay? We want to hear the answer to your research objectives. We don't really want to hear associations or causations that you have not proven. We don't want to hear speculation beyond the reach of your study. Okay, so state explicitly how your study can improve something. Don't lay claim to future ideas and projects, and never ever say more research is needed. Okay, so if you looked at the original poster that I showed you from Francesca Virginella with the validity and reliability of the new triage tool. So the conclusions, as she wrote it, answered those objectives. She said that it didn't work as well in non-expert providers, but she didn't write in her conclusions, so we should educate them, or because they weren't educated properly. Okay, because that was not proven by her study. All the study proved is that they have trouble using the tool. Don't stretch beyond the reach of your study. Don't say this tool should now be adopted as an international tool, unless that was the purpose of your study. Okay. And never say more research is needed. I use this analogy when on the webinar in the summer, so I apologize, some of you are going to hear it again. I take my car to this car wash, you drive in and they give you a menu and they say, okay, you can get your carpets cleaned and we can do your windows and we put the tire dressing, and you sign it all off and they send it away. And then they bring your car back and there's the big reveal. They bring you out and say, look, this is your car. This is what we've done to the wheels. Look how clean it is inside. The last thing I want to hear is, however, clearly further cleaning is needed. Right? That's the last thing you want to hear. So we don't want to hear about the fact that further research on your topic is needed. We want to know what your value proposition is. What did you prove for me? Means I don't need to sit in 8-minute presentation to know that further research in your field is necessary. I want you to show me what the conclusions were of your study. Okay, so here is an example of another poster here from the Faculty of Nursing from our university. Conclusions, right? So here the title is Validating the Professional Environment Assessment Protocol. Okay. Conclusions. Specific dimensions of the nursing home environment reduce the hazard of walking disability. Modifying these dimensions reduce disability among nursing home residents. And the 5-point scale was able to discriminate between environments as well as the 13-point scale. Right? So this is an example. They set out to prove this, to examine the association between the dimensions, and they proved it in the conclusions. You notice there's no mention that further research is needed. There's no mention that this should be adopted as the official protocol for all future studies in environmental assessment. It's their conclusions about the study. Number 8, include the ask. This is something very interesting that, again, I stole from the startup world when I was going through the startup incubator and we had to do a startup pitch, which is basically like one of these abstracts but on overdrive, because you get 3 minutes to present an entire company. And this thing they tell you is always at the end, tell your audience what you want from them, okay? So what do you want from the audience? Why are you there presenting your research? Okay. Do you want the audience to download and read your full article? Do you want them to contact you about collaboration? Do you want them to help you find funding? Do you want them to repeat the study in a different setting? So if you have a motivation for why you're there, it doesn't hurt to just stick it out there at the end and ask it outright. And for sure, give contact information if you want anyone to contact you. Obviously, most of us can find each other on the internet without any real contact information. but putting your email address or your LinkedIn profile or your X handle, whatever you want to be identified with, lets people know that you're open to being contacted. And you can do this in a number of ways. This is, I think, a very nice looking poster, again, from Samina Ali and her research group. So children don't need additive hydromorphone or acetaminophen when they receive ibuprofen for acute limb injuries. This is a very nice use of color, as you see, because in the left side, in the black, is the background objective methods and outcomes, the nitty-gritty that most of us don't read. And we're kind of drawn away from it instead to the white part, which is a graphical representation. And in the bottom left-hand corner is the ask. Okay, so what do they really want me to do? After reading this, they want me to go to that QR code and get the full abstract. So QR codes are a great way with your posters to redirect people to download your article, or you'll see people put their contact information at the bottom. So I think that concept of the ask, if there's a motivation that you're there for, if you're a reason why you're presenting this, then it doesn't hurt to just put it out there and say it outright. Number 9, check the text and revise as needed and get help. Okay, don't forget your copywriting tools. It's posters and slides, for some reason, to me, are a bit harder. I have terrible spelling skills, and some reason most of my slides, some piece of text will escape the spell check. So do that last minute spell check. Use your Grammarly or language tool or ChatGPT or whatever you want to help you with the grammar and presentation. And I have 2 secret things that I do for the last minute to check my presentations. One is I'm convinced that the long and exhaustive process of turning any presentation into a PDF immediately makes the errors spottable. I don't know, every time I make a PDF, I'm like, there's the spelling error. And then the other thing is I literally ask my mom to read through my presentations. My mom is not actually a physician, but she's an accountant. And my theory is that if you can adequately explain your research, someone with education outside of your field should be able to understand it. Okay, so it actually, I find really helpful to let someone who's not a specialist in your field read through it and see if it makes sense. Get in the reps. All right, so practicing your presentation to me is absolutely mandatory. And many of you have probably done many of these already, so I won't, I apologize if you're getting bored by this little talk, but for those of you who are new to this, definitely practicing it is super important. Can you keep on time is the number one thing. Okay, if any of you are hoping to walk into the room and basically make everybody in the room angry at you after you do your presentation, go 1 minute over. Okay, so if you go 1 minute over on your abstract, this is a real disaster, actually. I've been a moderator for many of these, so you're looking and we have a presentation that's full panel. Sometimes we will have, if they're 10 minutes presentations, you might have 12 presentations in 2 hours, which means if everybody's 1 minute late, the last speaker doesn't get to go. Okay, and this is really stressful for you as if you're a moderator, and it's really stressful for other people. I've been in that situation before where you're the last person on the abstract panel and you see everybody else, one person takes 5 minutes over, and by the time you go to do your abstract, everyone's leaving the room. Okay, so keeping that on time is super important. Can you speak without reading? Again, if you're the kind of person who uses those speaker notes on the PowerPoint, can you actually look up and engage with people? Being able to see people is really important, both for the audience who knows they're engaging with you, and also for the speaker to see if people are really connecting with you. Giving a webinar is very hard. I actually can't see any of you, so I actually have no idea whether everyone's connecting with what I'm saying. On an abstract presentation, you usually have the audience in front of you, so you need to be looking at them to see if they understand. When you do your practice runs, does the logic of the presentation flow or will you lose people? And particularly, this is where you want to pay really important to that transition from one slide to the next. Sometimes there's that big jump from the introduction to the methods. And in between, people are like, okay, you gave us a background of why triage is important. And now you're randomizing people, but I don't understand why. So really step back and look, is the transition between your introduction, methods, results, and conclusions, do they all follow smoothly from one another? Number 11, read the room. I definitely encourage you to get prepared well in advance and check the conference website or the email for the upload instructions. Do not count on having direct access to your presentation by USB or internet like we used to. 10 years ago, we all just showed up with a USB key, or you logged into your own Google Drive and just downloaded your presentation. Don't count on that. Don't count on having access to a keyboard anymore. So I always go, usually if I can, the day before, visit the room, look at where you'll be standing. I like to stand up on the podium and see how you'll face the audience. And this can sometimes keep you out of a really big problem situation. At Copenhagen last year, I was doing a presentation on the use of ChatGPT in disaster medicine. And I've done this presentation many times, and I like to combine some slides with some live streaming. So I usually do this in a browser window like Chrome or Firefox, where I open my slides as a PDF. And in the other window, I open up ChatGPT and I kind of just demo some use of ChatGPT. So I prepared my presentation well in advance. And I went to the room where I was going to be presenting in Copenhagen the night before, and I look and there is no keyboard, there is no mouse, there is only a slide clicker. And I was like, that's it, I cannot do my presentation. I really had a lot of fear of trying to do a presentation of ChatGPT without demoing it. Like, who wants to listen to me 20 minutes give slides about a software program? So because I had been there in advance, I went to the speaker room in a panic. I think I literally said, I'm in a panic. And they actually were really amazing. The staff at the site were really amazing. They worked through it. They found me a way to hook up a laptop over on the side so that I could do my presentation. But all of that was only possible because I was there well in advance. It's also just a good idea to see what that room looks like. Sometimes the rooms, you walk into them, the room in Copenhagen probably held 800 people. And I was like, okay, this is too big for my presentation. I've been in abstracts where the room holds 20 people. So get in there, visit that room, stand on the podium, get that sense of what it's going to look like, particularly if this is some of your first presentations. It really cuts down a lot of that anxiety when you've already stood up there and you've felt what it feels like. And then finally, have a game day ritual. Okay, so my ritual is panic first. Okay, this is my plan for all eventualities. This is just to remind myself that even for me, I've set at least a few hundred presentations. I still get anxious when I do them, and I just consider that's a normal part of my game day ritual. So I'm going to walk in the room and I'm going to be anxious. That's totally fine. Arrive ahead of time. You don't want to be the last person in the room. And please introduce yourself to the moderators. When you're a moderator for one of these sessions and you go in the room and the time comes and no one's introduced themselves, and you're like, are any of the speakers here? And you have to call them out and you don't know if anyone's there. That's really stressful for the moderators. So just walk in the room and say, yeah, hi there, I'm Jeffrey. I'm the third one to present. I'm all ready to go. Sit at the front of the room. There's such tight time between abstract presentations. The usual time is 0, actually, right? So usually you have a 10-minute presentation and then right next is a 10-minute presentation. So be right at the room at the front and get up there. Speak clearly and slowly. This is a lesson that I have to keep telling myself. It's very difficult. sometimes to just keep that enunciation, to keep things going slowly. Often we tend to talk really fast because we think we're going to run out of time, but just try to slow that down. When questions come up, just answer them the best you can and clearly indicate when you're speculating. You know, one of the major purposes of abstract presentations is to get feedback on your research. And I've got some amazing comments and amazing feedback on my research when presenting the abstract, which is awesome. Except I would rather get the feedback not when I'm standing in front of everyone, right? So that can be very intimidating when someone asks you a question about your research and you either don't know the answer or it's a part of your research that you've never considered. But this is a part of scientific research. So when you present, be expected for someone to be skeptical of what you said or ask further questions. It's not a personal assault. It's how science works. Answer those questions as well as you can. And if you're speculating, someone asks you, how were the participants blinded to the randomization procedure? If you don't know, just say, I don't know. If you like, I can get back to you with that information. And one of the most important lessons I was taught about public speaking in general, teaching or abstracts, was from Anders Reuter, who was one of my mentors when I did the European Master in Disaster Medicine. And he said, it's not important what you teach. It's important what the audience learns. Okay. And that I found very helpful to me. It took a lot of pressure out of me. It's not Hollywood and I'm not Brad Pitt. Okay. People are not here to see my exceptional acting skills. People are here to listen to my research. My job is to teach you about my research. So if I say or ah too many times, or if I pause for a moment because I can't remember what I was supposed to say, or if I say something and then have to correct it. This is science. It's about you learning about my abstract. Okay, so I try not to sweat about those things. It's just one of those things that happens to us. And I remember, it's not Hollywood. I'm not Brad Pitt. So that's sort of the whirlwind tour of these 12 tactical tips, which were: 1, read the instructions for authors. Don't get surprised when you get there about how long your presentation is or about how big your poster was supposed to be. Focus here on your objective. Understand what you are trying to teach the audience about your research. And if it's not related to that, delete it out of your presentation or your poster. Think about the value proposition. When you can, try to phrase your research in what the audience or whoever's reading it is going to gain from your research. They don't care about your research, they care about their problems. Create that snappy title that includes the study design, particularly if you have a poster. If the title does not engage people, they're not going to stay. Clarity over cleverness, minimize the text, keep it clear, keep it concise, keep it professional. Plot the data, emphasize data in graphs or plots or figures, simple figures that people are going to be able to follow. Finish with a strong conclusion. We want to hear about your research, not about what you plan on doing in the future, not about your speculation, what you have proven with your research. Include the ask. If you're there for some reason, if you're trying to get collaboration or you're trying to get funding, pop it out there in your presentation. Check the text, revise, get help from ChatGPT or Grammarly or your mom. Get in the reps, practice that presentation. Read the room, always go in that room ahead of time, take a look at it, stand on the podium, understand where you're going to be, and have a game day ritual. Get there in advance. Understand if you're me or maybe many of you out there, it's going to be an anxiety-provoking, stressful time, and to just get in touch with that and be ready to shine. Special thanks to Andrew, of course, who's been incredibly supportive in doing all the work to set up these webinars, and to my colleagues Samina Lee, Yus Behrens, Brian Rowe, Ian Steele, Francesca Virginella, and Mia Wisniewski, who provided some content for this session. For any of you who are writing an abstract or writing a paper, I really recommend this freely available guide to writing and publishing a scientific manuscript from Ian Steele. It's an amazing way to convert your abstract now into a published paper. And for any of you who are going to be attending WADM and you're interested in sort of taking your research skills up to a new project, I will be working with the WHO Kobe Center, myself from the University of Alberta, WADM, and the WHO Kobe Center on a one-day intensive research design course as a pre-conference course to Tokyo. And I would love to see any of you who are interested. We'd love to see you there. I think, Andrew, we have some time for some questions.
Yes, that's correct. We still have about 10 minutes. So if any of the participants in the remote audience would like to submit a question through the Q&A tab, please feel free to do so. One question for you, Jeff, that paper you just referenced, can we share a link to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to share? You want me to share it now?
You could send that to me and then I'll send it in a follow-up email to all the participants because I indicated we are recording this, so we'll share a link to this recording either later today or at the latest tomorrow morning, but within the next 24 hours for sure. So we can include that link in there. And I want to thank you, Jeff, for just the presentation overall. I found it very useful, very informative. So thank you for that. Let's see here. If we have any questions coming through, we have. Oh, okay. Here's a great question. Yeah.
Oh.
Do you want to take that, Jeff?
Oh, for a very short presentation of 5 minutes. Yeah, Esther, that's a very good question. All of what I said is exactly the same, basically. And the only thing is with a 5-minute presentation, it's even harder, and the onus is more on you to make sure you understand what is your objective. What are you trying to prove? Okay. And that's what, and I've done a number of these very short presentations. And like I said, when I was going through the startup incubator, we had 3 minutes to describe our why, what problem our company was solving, the company's corporate structure, where we were getting money, and what we wanted from people. And it's just a matter of chopping out everything that isn't directly relevant to what you want to say. All right. So I would definitely say if I had a 5-minute presentation, maximum 1 slide and like 3 sentences on the background. Okay. Don't give a literature review, give a couple statistics that say this is why it's important. Compress those methods, right? So can you give an idea of the methods without being in too much detail, and really focus on what the conclusions are from your study and why it's important to people. So.
And if I may add a comment to that, Jeff, though I'm not a polished presenter like you or probably many people on the call, but one thing I've noticed with some of these shorter presentations and even the 8-minute presentations is you don't need to provide a lot of the background information, but we do see that a lot. People identify the country and give a breakdown of its healthcare delivery system or demographic information. And a lot of that stuff, I think you can go into these presentations with the assumption that most people will know this information in advance, or you only have to touch on it very little. You don't have to spend a lot of time going into detail about this, which we'd kind of consider general knowledge that most people would have.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to use an example. You're going to WADM to present some research that you did on surge capacity. We don't need you to define what surge capacity is. We don't need you to explain what the 5S model is, right? Your audience knows a lot of this stuff. So that's a very important when you're writing an abstract, presenting, or writing a paper. Think about who the audience is and don't explain stuff that they don't need to know. You're absolutely right, Andrew. We don't have to define what a mass casualty incident is for our audience at WADM. And so that's something that shouldn't be on there. Cut that out. So thank you, Andrew. That's a very, very good point.
Yeah. I'll jump in, Jeff. There's actually the link to your article and 2 questions in the chat.
Okay, perfect. not seeing the chat here. Let's take a look. Okay. Thank you for the incredible tips. What is the best way to include the ask or what we need from the audience? Oh, that's an excellent question. I actually find it to be, I usually put it in my sort of thank you end slide and, you know, after the conclusions. The conclusions to me are about what I found. And then after that, I'm going to say, thank you for your attention, or it's been a pleasure here, or whatever. And then say, if you are interested in bringing this study to your site, if you know someone who might be able to fund it, please contact me here. So I think it's not really part of the conclusions, but more something you would add on at the end. And another question, any particular tips for when you're presenting online or video conference? Online presentations are so much harder, honestly, because you never know what's going on with the audience. And so I think things to remember when you're presenting online is to make sure that those slides are very clear. And I don't put too much text on those, okay? Because you want people actually paying attention to what you're saying. And don't whip through the slides too fast either, because you can't tell when people are actually keeping in touch with that. And yeah, that's it. They're really tough. Online presentations are really tough, particularly, I have to say, when you're in this webinar format and you can't see anybody's face, it can be very tricky. So I just try to focus. Looking on the camera is another skill to develop. Because if I'm looking down at my notes, actually, you're looking at my head, which is not really an awesome way to present. So make sure you're looking up at that camera and rehearse in ahead and try to minimize too much complicated topics on the slides. Yeah, is the poster from Summer Hudson considered formal? That's an excellent question about what makes a formal poster. I'm just going to move back. Which one was Summer's? This one? No, the previous one. So, so what is the dividing line between infographic and poster? Okay, so this is in a bit of a flux right now. I think what we're seeing is more of what my colleague Samina calls is the movie preview poster. Okay, so the poster is like a preview to a movie. The idea behind this poster is to get people to read the article, right? It's not to give away everything about the movie. So it's going to depend a little bit on the decorum of where you're presenting. But personally, I actually really like these type of posters. They're easy to interact with. They're fast. And I've certainly never really seen any place where I've been at a poster session, and Wadham would be an example, where I would see a poster like this and say, oh, this poster is not formal enough to be an academic poster. So I think there's a lot of flux in what a poster looks like. I personally am super comfortable with this as being an academic poster. The better poster, yeah. Allison, thanks for that comment. I'm not sure where that's going, but I think we're going with scientific meetings are moving towards a better poster in the sense that they are not as fully academic and rigid, right? It used to be that every session had its formal poster template and everyone had to follow that, and I think we're moving around. Are we allowed to come to before the conference starts? That one I wouldn't be able to answer. Sorry, that's will be a question that Andrew would be able to answer about when you can access the conference venue. How many slides should there be for a poster of 10 minutes? The only way you're going to know that is to practice it. Okay, so because some people use very few slides with lots of content. Some people use lots of slide with very little content. So because my rule is that I need enough slides to remind myself of what to say. I tend to use more slides. I'll use a slide even if it has 2 words on it, just to pop it up so I know what I'm supposed to talk about next. So I tend to use a lot of slides. So I actually don't think there is a really good rule on the number of slides. You know, people will say 1 slide per minute or something like that. That's way too slow for me. Okay, so 1 slide per minute for me is not nearly enough, where some people it would be. So the trick there is just practice those through. Oh, Patricia, can you provide any guidance on conducting a tabletop at the session? I'm not sure I really can. It's sort of a little bit outside of this session. What I would say for sure about tabletops is my opinion is that they have to have a kind of Goldilocks type of structure. So sitting down in the tabletop with just like a question and saying we're all going to talk about this question, I think is not enough structure. Where you sitting down and running through a bunch of slides and nobody interacts is too much structure. Okay, so tabletops are very tricky in getting that interactivity. Whatever you do, make sure that people are interacting and that they are aware that interaction is, I want to say mandatory. Mandatory might be a bit tough, but they definitely should get the sense that they're expected to contribute and that's the right thing to do. So that's sort of my guidance on the tabletops. Really going to depend on what your tabletop session is, right? Is it a discussion group? Is it a game that you're playing? Is it a simulation? Are you working together on a document? It's going to be really dependent on that. But I do always think that good fences make good neighbors. So I would make sure that your audience knows the rules, or I'm going to call them rules, but audience understands what their role is before going through their tabletop. Is that helpful? I'm sure it was kind of a bit vague because it wasn't really a presentation on tabletops, but I hope that's some advice that will help.
Jeff, was that a question about the tabletop presentations at the Wadham Congress or more broadly?
I'm not sure. It says any tips for the tabletop. It didn't really say whether for this one at the session. Okay. Can you provide any guidance for conducting tabletop at the session for Wadham?
So, in fact, Patricia's now, I see on the chat there, sorry, I didn't have that tab open. So the tabletop presentations are discussions, essentially. In fact, we probably should rebrand the name. They're really roundtable discussions. So you would be giving your presentation to at a roundtable with, I don't know how many seats we'll have, probably 8 or 12 seats, and you'll basically have 10 to 12 minutes to give a talk, and you have a lot of discretion in how you use that time. You'll want to present your abstract to a certain extent, but the idea is to engage with the other participants sitting at the table and have a discussion about what you're presenting. So a lot of the abstracts that were chosen for the tabletop or the roundtable discussions were ones that we felt were very conducive to a group discussion. And so the recommendation, we'll be sending guidelines on this, which should help, is to bring some sort of visual aid that you can use to reference during your talk, but not to come and just do a PowerPoint slide presentation at a table. Like, you want to find a happy medium between having something visual to engage the participants, but not have it so they're just staring at, say, your laptop while you scroll through slides, where you want to engage them so that when you're finished doing a formal part of your presentation, that there'll be a small group discussion.
Yeah, as Andrew is talking, I had the thought, strikes me sort of like grand rounds. You know, small group of people where you're discussing the issue at hand.
And then just so the others who might have a tabletop presentation at the Congress in May, you'll do your talk, I think 3 times during the session. So there'll be 2 presenters at each table, and they'll each have 10 to 12 minutes. And then once that time interval is up, the participants will move on to another table, and then hopefully you'll get a new group of 8 to 10 people, and you'll both have an opportunity to do your talk again. So you'll have an opportunity to present 3 times to 3 different groups of people throughout the session. So I hope that helps. We'll be sending a bit more guidance on that soon here. We're just updating the guidelines from the previous Congress and just want to see if we need to make any tweaks to how we conducted it in Ireland. But it was a format that people liked because some people do really well in these small group discussions and presentations. It's a little less intimidating than being up in front of a group of, say, 100 people or 50 people. And some of these topics just are really conducive to discussions where people can share their experiences, their lessons learned, what they've done at their facility or healthcare institution, or on a deployment to a sudden onset disaster, or whatever that scenario may be. So that's kind of a really, really broad overview of how those will work. So I hope, Patricia, that helps provide some insight for you.
I see one last question we haven't addressed is where the endorsements or funding credits could go. And should one add ethics approval? I would say definitely should add ethics approval. This is a bit of a controversial area, and it's definitely in evolution. Certainly in my career, at the beginning of the career, we never talked about ethics issues during abstracts and posters. But I think we're all becoming much more aware of how important the ethical issues are around research. So I definitely like to see those in the I usually put them in the methodology, I have to say. Like the first sentence of the methodology, the study was approved by the University of Alberta using this number. And that could be either on your poster or in your oral presentation. And Andrew, I think we've addressed all the questions as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think so. Don, did you have any parting comments?
No, I've answered a couple of the questions separately. They're in the thing, but I think it's a great overview, and it's particularly for the short, some of the reactions to the shorter formats. Some people are like, why do I get so little time? But I can tell you, and I think, Jeff, you talked about this from experience, if you get the opportunity to talk to the Minister of Health or the CEO of the hospital, you're going to get 5 minutes. So if you're lucky. So, it's a skill to develop, to be able to be concise, be direct, and get your message across quickly. And it's not just an academic skill, it's a professional and enhancing skill. So, great overview from Dr. Frank. And somebody asked, will we have a follow-on webinar for how to publish? And I think that's a good thing we could do.
We certainly could, absolutely.
So, and that's all.
All right, Andrew, unless there's something else, I guess we'll close up here. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you to talk about this super exciting topic. And I look forward to seeing all of you in Tokyo.
Thanks, everybody.